Hi, I'm Esther.
And I'm Sean.
I write about AI news here at Tech Target in Massachusetts.
And I edit Esther's stories.
We're here to talk with tech experts about everything AI and ChatGPT.
Don't forget Google Gemini.
Whether it's who's ahead in the generative AI race, the metaverse, digital twins, or even the latest in autonomous vehicles, we've got it covered. Right, Sean?
Yep, we've got it covered.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another Targeting AI podcast. Our podcast guest is Vijay Balasubramaniyan, CEO and co-founder of Pindrop, a global voice tech and security company. Pindrop helps enterprises prevent phone fraud. Before finding Pindrop 13 years ago, Vijay was a research engineer for IBM and Google. He also worked as a senior software engineer for Siemens. Thank you, Vijay, for joining us on today's podcast.
Thank you, Esther, for having me.
So to kick it off, can you tell us a little bit more about Pindrop? I know I kind of did a brief intro there, but how does it work for enterprises? How do you guys work with enterprises?
Yeah, so for enterprises, the question that we're largely answering for them is in a remote world, is this a right human that you're interacting with? So, traditionally, how you'd establish that is by asking questions. What's your date of birth? What's your mother's maiden name? What's your social security number? And with the number of data breaches that we've had as a community, last year, I think there were 1,800 data breaches affecting almost every US citizen right now. All the questions answers are already available in the dark web, so these don't serve their purpose anymore. So what's happening is they find that organizations are looking for ways in which they can establish that you're really Esther calling them to do a wire transfer or to check up on healthcare records or to try and get your new laptop shipped to a different address. So in these situations, what we do is we help them establish that it's really Esther by saying, yeah, we know it's Esther's voice, we know it's Esther's device, we know it's Esther's behavior. And so we can multi-factor authenticate Esther as a person in a remote world.
What are the authentication points that you look at? And
So,
it's like my voice can sound differently depending on who I'm talking to.
yeah, no, but the fact is that what we're looking at is actually your vocal anatomy. So your voice could sound differently, but it's being produced by a vocal anatomy that's not changing. It changes over time. So you're absolutely right. One of the things that we have to do is understand how your voice ages over time and compensate for it. But the fact is that your vocal anatomy, which includes your entire throat and your vocal cords, the shape of your mouth and your entire oral cavity and your nasal cavity, everything that like your fingerprint or your face is visible. All of this is invisible, but you have a particular anatomy, and what we're doing is measuring that or forensically measuring that to determine that it's really you. And we do this for the largest organizations. We have as customers 8 of the top 10 banks, 5 of the top 7 insurances, some of the biggest retailers in healthcare. But that's how you do the voice side of what we do, and that's just one factor.
Okay, so just to jump into deepfakes
Yep.
right away, and more about cheap fakes later. But you founded a company that focuses on finding fraudulent voices, right? I'm just looking at my notes over here.
Yeah.
So can you speak about some of the trends you've noticed in recent years and maybe this summer and spring about audio deepfakes and voice clones?
It's really alarming. So last year, as generative AI exploded, we thought we'd see a lot of deep fakes coming into these call centers. But last year, we were seeing about one deep fake every single month. Starting this year, in the first 5 months of this year or 6 months of this year, we started seeing a deep fake every single day across every single customer. So we've seen a 450% increase in attacks from attackers employing deepfakes in just the first 6 months of this year compared to all of last year. And the year is just getting started. It's been a pretty alarming increase.
These are calls coming into contact centers like bank customer service centers.
Yep.
What are these hackers trying to do?
So they're doing 3 big things. One, they're trying to do account reconnaissance. So what they're doing is they're essentially saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to try and use a deepfake or generative AI to actually synthesize voices that can be used in conversational AI systems. So if you think about all of these banks, they have automated systems that say, press one to speak in English, press two to speak in Spanish. Traditionally, what the fraudsters would do is they'd actually call in and punch in, let's say, your social security number, Sean, or your social security number, Esther. And if the organization says, oh, welcome to Bank X, your account balance is Y, then they know, Sean, you bank with that particular organization. If it says, I don't recognize who you are, then they know you don't have a bank account. What they're using is they're using generative AI to create systems to automatically do this with synthetic voices. That's the first attack that we saw. Then we started seeing attacks where they started using your particular voice. So, for example, hey, now I'm going after a high net worth individual. Using my reconnaissance, I have figured out someone has a bank balance of over $100,000. Now I need to target that particular person's bank account so that I want to take over that account. In that particular case, if the bank balance warrants a deep fake, what they're starting to do is create a deep fake of your voice. In a lot of cases, they're going after high net worth individuals, and a lot of these are, people who have either, had some audio recording out there on YouTube or on TikTok or something like that. And so they're using that to create a deep fake of that person and going after that particular person's account. So those are two examples of where they're using generative AI to actually target an account and do reconnaissance on an account. The third place is they're doing identity theft, but I'll come to that if you'd like to know more.
Yeah, so we were actually going to ask in what ways generative AI has kind of changed the way deepfakes has been developed, obviously. So, what was the trend before generative AI? And again, can you just explain like how is that has shifted as well as we have seen this like output of so many generative AI systems? And what are some examples that you can mention?
Yeah, so an example is what happened is traditionally in a lot of these situations, it's an individual fraudster who says, like, there's a gang out of West Africa, there's a gang out of Eastern Europe, there's a gang out of Philippines, there's a gang out of Mexico, and what they're doing is they're picking up the phone, calling an organization, and trying to steal your healthcare records or steal your account, and so on and so forth. All of that was great, and they were able to make money out of that, but it doesn't scale. That is, if I am an individual and I'm going after Sean's account, I can only go after Sean's account. That's pretty much it. Now what these fraudsters are able to do is they're able to set up systems where if I need to go after a Latin American woman's account, then the next account that I'm going after is a white American's account. The next account that I'm going after is an Indian's account. I can actually create generative AI systems that talk in each of these languages and each of these demographics and scale those attacks and go after each of them. And what they're doing is they're feeding these generative AI systems important pieces of information. So they're saying, okay, if the person asks you what is the social security number of the target account, use this social security number. If they ask the address, so they populate all of this information, and then the generative AI system actually has a full-blown conversation with a call center agent and does this entire conversation with the call center agent not realizing they're not even speaking to a human. They're just speaking to a machine that's gotten all of this information and is having a full-blown conversation, but the machine is having that full-blown conversation ultimately to take over your account and steal money from it. So they have managed to scale their attacks in massive ways and in ways that we have not seen before generative AI. We're seeing that now. Does that help?
That does help. I wonder if, as you guys are like kind of trying to decipher this, have you noticed a specific Gen AI system or specific Gen AI company that keeps coming up that they're using, or is it just anything?
We've publicly announced many of these generative AI systems that were used in the President Biden attack. We're the ones who discovered what was the AI app used in that particular thing. The crazy thing is the number is growing like crazy. So when we started doing this work 8 years back, there used to be one voice cloning system called Lyrebird. At the end of last year, there were 120. By March of this year, that number exploded to 358 voice cloning apps. So There are 358 ways in which you can clone your voice. Not only that, when we started, it used to take, like, for example, I don't know if you remember Google, when they wanted Google Home to speak like John Legend, they got John Legend into the into their studios, and he spoke for hours on end, by certain accounts, like close to 20 hours of content. Right now, you need 3 seconds at the lower end. So 3 to 5 seconds of audio, and you can clone someone's voice. And with 15 seconds of someone's voice, you can actually create a very high quality clone of that person's voice. So it's gone from one app to 358 by the end of March, and from 20 odd hours to 15 seconds, and in certain cases, 3 seconds.
Okay, so out of those 358 apps, we know one of them, and I think you know it too, 11 Labs.
Okay.
We use 11 Labs to voice our stories.
Yep.
It's high quality. I think that was the one used in the New Hampshire robocall. But anyway, one of the things that piqued our interest for this was cheap fakes. So what's a cheap fake and how is it different than a deep fake?
Yeah, so these voice attacks have a spectrum of attacks. On the extreme end is an actual deep fake, and actually it's an attack known as a voice conversion attack, and I'll come to that in just a bit. But on the other end of the voice attack spectrum is what's known as a cheap fake. This is where you're actually using individual words or replays of someone's voice, and you're doing some kind of editing to it. You're either slowing it down, you're speeding up, you're splicing together different pieces of audio to essentially get to a particular end result. There are great examples of that. When Nancy Pelosi slurred in her speech, that was a cheap fake, because all they took audio, slowed it down, and it seemed like she was slurring in her speech. She wasn't slurring in her speech. So that's an example of a cheap fake. We see cheap fakes in attacks. So there's a lot of voice systems that try to identify your voice by a certain phrase that you say. So, for example, my voice is my password. And there are attackers who will call you up and get you to say those individual words and piece them together. A great example is an organization in Canada says, at Bell, my voice is my password. So this fraudster calls the customer and says, hey, I'm calling from the local library. You borrowed the book For Whom the Bell Tolls. And the customer is like, for whom the bell tolls? So he's got Bell because this was at Bell Canada, right? And so they're taking each of these individual sentences, splicing them together, and trying to beat the system. Those are examples of cheap fakes.
That's very interesting. As you were talking, like, if all it takes is for someone to kind of take, for example, Nancy Pelosi, like you mentioned, and like just slur the words, how
Yeah.
would I know that's not actually Nancy Pelosi talking? You know, like,
Yeah. It's really
how
hard,
do we
Esther.
know?
It's really, really hard. So we've done lots of studies on a human's ability to identify whether something is a deep fake or not. And the results are really, really abysmal, right? Like when we did the study, we found humans had, and we did the study about a year back, about 57% ability to detect whether a particular piece of audio is real or a deep fake. When you think about 57%, that's 7% then better than a random coin toss. So, it's 7% better than you just flipping a coin. So that's how poor you are. And now it's actually become even worse with the latest state of deep fakes. The latest studies have humans at a 38% accuracy. So 2/3 of the time, you're getting it wrong on whether this is a real piece of audio or a real piece of video or a deep fake. And so it's become really, really bad on our ability, or our humans' ears' ability to detect whether something is a deep fake. And this is by design. We as humans are not good at catching subtle differences, because otherwise our brains would explode. We're great at matching patterns. Oh, this voice sounds similar to my dad, so it must be my dad. There is noise in this voice, and you've seen these tests, right, where you have the first letter and the last letter and everything else is jumbled, and you're still able to make out that word said hello. Like there was a H and an O, and then everything in between is jumbled. That's the human's brain's capability of constantly matching patterns. It doesn't have the ability to say, oh, there's something a little more robotic in this particular voice, therefore it's a deep fake. We are really poor at detecting deep fakes, and therefore you need technology.
Let's jump into misinformation about the U.S. election and how prevalent are fake voice robocalls. Have you seen any? Esther's came across one that appeared to show President Biden looking to have dementia. That was a visual. Do you see any audio already being used? I imagine as we get closer to the election, maybe fake polling, maybe fake calls from the candidate. What kind of stuff have you seen, and what kind of things do you anticipate?
Yeah, the biggest one we saw was the Biden robocall in New Hampshire. And we're the ones who discovered that it was created, like you said, with 11 labs. And then 11 labs acted really rapidly and shut down the particular account that was used to create that particular robocall. What we think is, as we get closer to the election, you're going to see more of it. So you're going to see it based on a local poll worker. And some of it might actually be happening. The unfortunate thing is we're not in the middle of every call going to a consumer, and we can't be, because you can't intercept all of those calls and run them through a system currently, or there is no way to do that currently. And so we don't know what's already happening in your average consumer call. But a proxy to that is what we're finding with uh, scam calls. In scam calls, you're seeing grandparents getting targeted, and we're getting pulled into a lot of investigations where there is this one example where an entire county got hit between Friday and Sunday. All the senior citizens got calls, pretending to be their grandkids, and then each of them essentially on Monday morning goes to law enforcement and says, I lost $2,000. I lost $20,000. And so you're starting to see fraudsters use this, and we get pulled into some of these attacks. But what is happening at the average consumer level is a little bit of a black box to us, and we'll see more of that as we get closer to the election.
You feel like it's going to be someone on the phone to an individual voter rather than, and that'll be done on a mass basis, you think, as we get closer to the election?
Yeah. What the phone system and AI has done is you have this great combination of scale and hyper localization. You can go target a particular county whose issues are very specific, and you can get the candidate to either say or not say something to that particular county. And you can use AI to just scale out those attacks. You can even do something like a denial of service. If there's a particular county that's not going to vote for me, I can actually go to that county and say, oh, polling offices are closed. And I can use the voice of the local law enforcement or whatever saying there's a hurricane coming through, the local offices are closed. That is the kinds of attacks. And it may not be by somebody within the US. It could be from a nation state who wants to disrupt elections. And so that's what we're most worried about. And that's what, is at stake here.
Obviously, you work with enterprises, right? So I wonder if you also work with government organizations to kind of try to like detect this and try to help them out as well.
We are starting to. So we, especially after the New Hampshire discovery, the Attorney General there, who reacted really, really quickly, John Formella, invited us to the Attorney General's, conference, where we were on a panel with him and we talked about the perils. So we talked about what kind of tabletop exercises we need to do and help and stuff like that. But it's still very, very nascent at this stage. It's almost like this huge threat is here. We don't quite know how quickly we can respond to it. And so different groups are starting to work towards, we're working with the FTC, which is another government body, to start building out what is the response to attacks like this. We were the winners of the FTC Voice Cloning Challenge, which is a challenge they created to look at technologies that can help in this area. So we're starting to work with government, but it's not going at the speed that I would like. It's just really slow.
One of the things that I also know that there's deepfakes in voice, but also there's deepfakes in videos, right? And so a lot of companies like Meta doing like AI labeling, and recently they changed the way that they label their
Yeah.
made with AI to like AI info. Do you think there are other things that I guess vendors can do in order to make sure that everyone is aware?
Yeah, I think the watermarking efforts or adding signals into the video or the audio to say it's created by AI and it's created by Meta's AI engine or some other AI engine is a good one. But in practical reality, watermarks don't work very well. Like, for example, in the Biden robocall, when people started testing the audio against 11 Labs detection engine, which had put in a watermark, the response came back that it's 2% likely generated by us. So 98% of the watermark had been erased. And the reason it got erased is because someone used 11 Labs to create the audio, then record it, then play it across telephony channels, which stripped away all of this content. And so as it goes through all of these channels and all of these audio configurations, the content automatically gets deleted. And so if you have an active adversary, it's going to be easier for them to detect it. In fact, there's some great studies out there that show 99% of all watermarks can be deleted. If it's a watermark you can detect, an adversary can detect it and therefore can delete it. So it's a good tool, and it's good for the good people to use so that you know when it is created in good ways that this was AI generated. But when an active adversary is trying to do this, they're going to leave no signs. And so that's why you need to have tools that forensically detect something has been altered.
So before I ask my next question, though, just follow up on Esther's. Are there audio watermarking technologies?
Yeah, and that's what a lot of these technologies are trying to add. Add audio watermarking technologies. The only thing is that they don't work very well across transmission channels, and they don't work very well when there's an active adversary.
Do you have any feeling about regulation coming down with government regulation? You spoke about the slow pace of government working with them on prevention, but what about regulation? Any chance, let's say in the next 10 years, regulation could rein in deep fakes and cheap fakes, whether audio or visual or video?
I think it's first technology and then regulation. You could regulate but not have technology, and then it doesn't matter. If you say, "Hey, AI videos are bad," and we're gonna fine you for AI videos, but if you have no ways of detecting them, then there's no point. So I think they both have to go hand in hand. But I think it's absolutely essential for people to say, okay, every single content producer needs to be able to independently determine if something is AI generated or not just AI generated from within their environment. Like, we got introduced to a group where there was this very famous social media influencer who was who's a science-based social media influencer, so a lot of science videos. Suddenly on Meta, he was selling blindness cures, and that was again a deep fake of him, right? And so we were brought in, and we discovered the deep fake as well as what engines were used and so on and so forth. But the point is, in that particular case, it wasn't Meta, right? Like, so Meta or Amazon or Google or whoever needs to have the capability to detect what is AI generated and what is not, and needs to have that responsibility. Otherwise, we're going to just see a whole bunch of disinformation.
I wonder if there needs to be more of a restriction with these tools, right? Because with like 11 Labs, there's a kind of like a free version. So maybe, well, is restriction, can that be an answer of like not everyone can have access to it? Because you're saying first it was one every month,
Yeah.
now is one every day. So
Yeah.
can that help?
No, but because there are 358 of them. 11 Labs is incredible. They're actually doing, among all the voice cloning systems, they're actually one of the best in terms of all the safeguards that they're putting in place. But there's a lot of open source ones. There are 30 that come out from China, voice cloning systems coming out of China. There are 3 coming out from Russia. So you're not going to be able to ask them to do certain things. And this is where, right, like mandating that at every piece of area, like at the source. So the voice cloning software must make sure that their systems are being used properly. So when Esther is trying to clone her voice, is it really Esther who's given consent? Because I can go into one of these voice cloning systems and say I have consent from you by creating your voice in a completely different system, right? And beating that the safeguards in that system. So it has to be at the source. It has to be through transmission. So anything that's the communication system. So all of the communication and the internet systems need to check for AI content. And then at the destination, so your social media sources, your media content, your news media, they all have to check, is this AI content? And it has to happen at all these three places, because if it doesn't happen at all of these three places, the weakest link will be the place that doesn't check, and you'll have AI content getting through.
Okay, so we've been talking about all these voice cloning issues, hacking, deepfakes. So, how much of this is cybersecurity, and how much of your business is cybersecurity in the voice realm, and how much of this is an AI issue, or is it both?
It's a great question, and I haven't quite compartmentalized it in that way, but let me try. I think it's both, and I'll give you the use cases. So there are use cases that we protect, like for example, the average customer calling in, and we're protecting their call centers. But we're increasingly starting to see attacks against employees themselves. So the employees doing password resets, we're starting to see attacks where they're using deepfakes to reset passwords, in which case it becomes beyond voice to a cybersecurity issue, because I'm giving the keys of the kingdom, keys of my kingdom to a random attacker. And then it goes beyond that, that AI has just made this massively scalable. In fact, I think deepfakes has broken trust in commerce, because you can't talk to a bank or healthcare, and you can easily deepfake your answer there. Has broken trust in media, because news media and social media, is it Tom Hanks selling dental plan ads or not? That's broken. And in communications, with the grandparent scam that we're seeing, with the Zoom bombing that we're seeing. So we're seeing deepfakes break trust in commerce, in media, and in communications. And I don't know the last time a new technology broke trust in three fundamental areas all at the same time. So I think it's an AI issue, it's a cyber security issue, and it's for sure a voice issue as well.
Okay, one dumb question.
Yeah.
Do you guys use generative AI in your own platform?
We do. So what we do is, for example, one of our big things is we are constantly catching these bad guys. And over time, if you actually come to Pindrop, every conference room is named after a bad guy that we've got. So we've got Chicken Man and Chipmunk and Pepe and Dava and so on and so forth. What happens is every time we identify a call that is fraudulent, a subset of those calls, the fraud teams at these organizations investigate them just to see patterns and to go make arrests and so on and so forth, as well as. So we're getting all of that feedback. And so they're constantly looking at all of these calls that we've marked as fraud and providing us feedback that you actually got it right. Similarly, when we miss calls, they're able to tell us, oh, you got these wrong, and this was a fraudulent call. And so, what we are starting to do is we've created what's known as a fraud co-pilot that helps these teams start connecting dots. Oh, you know what? Did you realize that the voice on this particular call is the same voice on 400 other accounts, on 400 other calls, accessing 400 other accounts, right? And so, being able to give fraud teams better abilities to catch these really prolific fraudsters with a conversational tool, right? Like, on what calls is Pepe been targeting us? So the system being able to produce all of those calls in a very, very simple fashion, we're starting to create a fraud co-pilot that will help our investigative teams, our fraud analyst teams, improve their job function. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Another question I had is, you guys have an engine, right? Like,
Yeah.
basically you were just talking, what is it, right? And what particular systems do you use for that? Yeah, engine.
So we have an engine, and it's fundamentally comprised of three big things along with a network, right? It's comprised of things that look for anomalies in your voice, as well as look for, is it the right voice? Look for anomalies in your device, and as well as, is it the right device? Look for anomalies in your behavior, as well as, is it the right behavior? And so that's at the core of what we do. And one of the cool things about Pindrop is we do a lot of, all of this is in-house. We've built this over time. The device capabilities, identifying your device by its sound signature, was my PhD thesis. Then we added voice and we added behavior. We have close to 160 patents in this area, and we built it largely from the ground.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Vijay, for joining us on today's podcast. We really appreciate it and we learned a lot. So, for our listeners, please feel free to connect with Vijay on LinkedIn, as well as just check out their website to learn more about their AI engine.
Our next guest is Harman Carr, VP of AI and Autonomous Endpoint Management at Tanium, cybersecurity and systems management company. Before Tanium, Harman was on the engineering team and served as an officer in the United States Air Force. Thanks a lot for joining us, Harman.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, we're so glad you're here with us. And Tanium is obviously a vendor that's focused on protecting the world's security conscious organizations. Where and how does AI fit into that?
Tanium at its premises, what we have focused on over the last decade, if you will, is around giving customers, large organizations, visibility into their enterprises. So what that means as an organization, historically, if you wanted to know what was happening across all of your endpoints, what are all my machines doing, what our workstation servers, etc., are doing, it took you hours to typically days to collect that data and understand what the state of those machines were. And then if there was an actual threat that you needed to respond to, that was a pretty laborious work. It took you hours, sometimes days to respond to that as well. So what Tanium has focused on is giving you real-time visibility. So that's just a couple of seconds of understanding what does my current landscape look like? What are the threats that I'm exposed to? Where am I vulnerable? And what needs to be addressed? And we've been able to do that very, very effectively. We've been able to give customers that visibility into their networks. And what we're focusing on next, especially with our autonomous endpoint management, is how do we use the data that we have access to, since Tanium is running today on millions and millions of endpoints, and help you respond to threats even faster? And how do we give you confidence in when you're responding to a threat, the measures that you want to take are going to be effective?
Are you seeing any generative AI generated attacks like deepfakes or social engineering that the bad actors are using Gen AI? And also, does your company have a role in working with things like deepfakes, whether audio or video, preventing them, maybe not on social media, but how they affect organizations?
I think things like deepfakes, it's kind of similar to phishing attacks, if you will, like 10, 15 years ago. Every single organization's had to talk about that. And regardless if you were a bank, if you're a retailer, didn't matter. It's something you got to be cognizant about. And I think deepfakes kind of fall in the same category. Historically, we've known them as it's something that happens to famous people. It happens to celebrities. People sort of mimic them. But now we're seeing more and more of, you get a call and it sounds like it's your CEO. You get a call, it sounds like your boss, and they're requesting access to maybe data they're requesting. It is something that it applies to every single organization, not just because we're a security organization. It's more applicable to us. And I think it's something every single organization needs to be aware of. And where we fit into the picture in terms of deepfakes and things like that, I think it really comes down to just like phishing attacks. Someone's going to click on that link. So you have to have a plan to respond. Same thing with deepfake. Someone's going to get that call. It sounds like their CEO, and they're going to give them access to data that they shouldn't give them access to. So how do you respond? Do you have the tools to understand what type of threat has been invited into your network? And do you have the tools to fix it? And that's what Tanium really focuses on, is giving you that visibility into your network.
In general, what would you say is the dangers of deepfakes in a corporate environment?
There's so many dangers of deepfake. There's a couple of things I'll touch on. Bigger picture, not just in corporate environments, right? The psychological impact. We're starting to see more and more. I think the most recent kind of mainstream was around Taylor Swift. with deepfakes. There's several about how people have been impacted and someone's taking their financial information, draining their bank accounts and things like that. There's a lot of sort of negative impacts associated with deepfakes that can come in. In a corporate world, if you kind of look at it, there's this tendency, we have this inherent and implicit trust that if someone calls with a certain authority or a power, you're going to respond without questioning it. And deep fakes, they're becoming much and much more ubiquitous. You actually don't need a ton of data to create a deep fake. It used to be that you need, hundreds of pictures of someone or a couple of minutes of their audio. Now it's down to just a couple of pictures and a couple of seconds of audio. And you can create a very, very real, video, photo, audio of that person, that clip of that person now.
I wonder if there is what you guys advise the clients that you work with. Well, how do you advise them to mitigate against those risk of how do I know that the person that's calling me is not really the CEO of the company or is not really my boss saying, oh, I need to answer this question real quick? How do you mitigate against that?
I wish I had a really good answer for you and saying, if you just did X, it would solve and you could identify it. It's really not that simple. So as an organization, we focus on the endpoints, not the human side of things, if you will. So for us, what we want to make sure that organizations have the power to is when someone does get into your network, something does happen, you have tools to respond to those things. I think ahead of that is having to just proactive and preventative measures, just like you would. How do you train your employees to make sure that they're not responding to emails they shouldn't be responding to, right? Even just badging into a building, that they're cognizant of who they're letting in behind them. It's sort of a similar kind of approach and similar type of training. And I think we'll see more and more organizations sort of adopt trainings to where, hey, these are things to look for to see if this is a potential deep fake. There's laws that are being introduced as well. So that's comforting a little bit.
How has deepfakes progressed and what ways has technology, especially for Tanium, in what ways have you guys adapted in order to meet what you were talking about before with it taking now just a couple of seconds of video, a couple of seconds of audio, a couple of seconds of pictures?
We have to be constantly innovating, constantly innovating. Even if you look at our trajectory of what we've worked on in the last, decade even, every single year we've introduced not just one, but really multiple products responding to different things that have emerged. Right now, in the last couple of years, for example, data became a big thing. People understanding where sensitive data lived in your organization. So you needed to respond really quickly to see, was anyone storing PII information where they shouldn't be storing PII information, right? Because remember when, HIPAA laws came into play, GDPR, we created a technology that helps you identify where does sensitive data live. And then, more recently, customers want to know, what are my employees? How are my employees sort of feeling about their experience with technology? And I want to have a pulse into that. So we created a technology on how do you measure digital employee experience and their interaction with technology, their interaction with the tools that they use day to day. Staying on top of it is a big, big thing for us, and autonomous endpoint management is actually really focused on that. And it drives out of customers saying, we have a ton of visibility now, we have a ton of data, we just don't know what to do with it. Help us prioritize this data, help us respond to things faster, give us intelligence to be able to do that.
A lot of employees of enterprises are using social media, the same devices that they use to work. So is there a danger of bad actors entering through social media networks? If so, how do you prevent that?
Yes, I think it's really anywhere you can click on something silly, do something silly, not even just social media, really anywhere. And I think it goes back to the principle of what I was talking about earlier. You have to know what is happening on every single endpoint that has any piece of company data. You have to have visibility into those endpoints. You need to also have reach into them to take them off the network if you do think there's an issue there. And you need to be able to do that in a matter of seconds, minutes, not hours or days, and which is what historically we've relied on, is doing these things. It's okay that we collect data that's hours and respond to that data that's days old and making these decisions. Now it's literally, we think something's happened, someone's done something they shouldn't have done. we need to respond now and do that in just a couple of seconds.
How does your military experience inform your work in the private infosec world?
Yeah, it actually has a pretty significant influence, I'll be honest. I think in the military, just naturally, you're taught from your training from the very beginning to be a lot more aware of everything that you see and question everything that you see. So that plays a big role into it. So when we get training from the very beginning about even propaganda, for example, right? Where is that stemming from? You should ask those questions. So it does make you a little bit more aware when you see things on the internet or when you get an email, you're like, is this legitimate? Where is this coming from? And you're more keen to ask for questions or the sources of things. And so I think that's played a big role into just even my background and my decision making, is having that background.
Obviously, we're talking about the elections this year. There's numerous elections, not just the one in the U.S. But so how would you say that deepfakes have like played a role in that? Have you guys seen a more increased amount of deepfakes, especially as it relates to elections?
I mean, not just elections, I think in general. Misinformation, disinformation, and the speed it's happening now it's sometimes mind-blowing how quickly people can come up with things. If you just like open your iPhone and go to the App Store and just type in the word deepfake, you can see like 12 apps that are free right off the bat where you can create anything you really want to. So yes, deepfakes are playing a big role in misinformation as it relates to anything, any political event, any non-political event, even, people just think they're being funny on the internet. And you have no idea how far some of those things are reaching. I think going forward, as laws are introduced, as people are made aware that these things are stemming from, it's not real, and people are understanding what deepfakes are, we'll start to see more and more, hopefully, platforms like X and Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc., actually start to flag for those things. I'm hoping that sort of the next evolution is flagging of this may be potentially fake. And then eventually, as technology improves to identify those things, we can get better and better data about what we're looking at is real or not.
Harman, thank you so much for being with us, and keep up your good work and helping us protect ourselves. And good luck with all the new generative AI stuff that's coming down. And so for our listeners, please check us out at Targeting AI podcast on techtarget.com. And see you next time. Thank you, Harman.
Thank you. Thank you so much.